I have been scrolling through the internet and I finally found the most perfect dress to recreate for you guys, and I can't wait to show you. Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca and I redesign old thrifted items and I show you step by step how to do it. In today's video, we are going to recreate this beautiful off-shoulder dress with 3D flowers on it. It's super pretty, but it's also quite expensive. So that's why it's so amazing to redesign it with old secondhand materials, and in this case I'm using an old tablecloth. If you want to know how I make it, stay tuned for this tutorial. Let's get started. Okay, so we're starting off by making the pattern, and I'm using a basic pattern that I'm showing you in a previous video. I'll link it down below so you can watch it. We're going to cut away the top part of the pattern piece because this is going to be a strapless dress. Trace around it and then add the length you want for the skirt. Then slash and spread the paper evenly out so that you get more volume at the bottom. Trace around the new pattern piece and cut it out. Do the same thing for the side panels, the front panel. Mark all your pattern pieces. The front piece will be cut out on fold, so you only need one front, but the side panel and back piece, you'll have to cut out 2 of each. Mark all your pieces and then cut them out. When you have marked all your pattern pieces, you can go ahead and cut them out in the outer fabric. And I am not adding any seam allowance here because that was already included in my pattern, but I'm remembering to cut the front on fold. Then you can go ahead and cut it out in a lining fabric and also cut out the bodice piece without the skirt part in a third fabric. Next, cut out 2 rectangles measuring 40 centimeters one way and about 15 centimeters the other way. Next up is the rose petals. Each rose has petals in 3 different sizes. The medium one is measuring 12 centimeters wide and 9 centimeters tall, and the small one is measuring 9 centimeters wide and 6 centimeters tall, and the big one is measuring 16 centimeters wide and 13 centimeters tall. You'll need to cut out 32 pieces of each size. Next, you can go ahead and sew the sides for the dress together, right side facing each other on the lining, outer fabric, and the inner bodice. Make small cuts around the bodice as close to the seam as possible, where the bodice is curving, usually around the bust area and also at the waist, and iron this flat so that it's pressed open. And then with the bodice piece, we're going to fold the seam over and then we're going to sew it down so we're keeping it in place, and this is going to create a casing for boning later. The width of the casing depends on the size of the boning you have. But the boning should be very snug inside of the casing. So just measure the width of the boning you have and then make a casing a slightly bigger. Then you can go ahead and insert the boning and make sure that there is room at the top and also at the bottom of the bodice where there is no boning, so that you can sew over the top part of the bodice without hitting the boning, and also at the bottom. To keep the boning from rubbing the inside of the dress, sew bias tape along the lower edge of the corset. Now it's time to sew all the dress layers together. Lay the inner corset flat with the right side facing up. On top of that, place the lining fabric also with the right side facing up. And finally, lay the outer dress fabric on top with the wrong side facing up, aligning all the layers, and sew a top stitch to keep them all in place. Between all the layers, we're going to sew a support stitch to keep the lining in place. Take the lining fabric and inner corset together as one layer and the outer fabric as the second layer. Align them carefully. In between these two layers, sew a support stitch along the seam allowance to secure the lining and prevent it from shifting. Now moving on to attaching the zipper. Sew one side of the zipper to the outer fabric. Make sure the zipper teeth are facing outwards. After sewing one side, make a mark at the bottom of the zipper to ensure alignment. Then attach the outer side of the zipper to the opposite edge of the outer fabric. Sew down and make sure to match the bottom. Now we're going to close the bottom of the dress. Turn the dress inside out and close the back seam by sewing from the bottom of the zipper down to the hem. Sew as close to the zipper edge as possible for a smooth finish. Now you're going to take the layers in between the dress and the outer fabric and you're going to sandwich the zipper in between the lining fabric and the outer fabric, and you're going to sew the lining together to the zipper so that when you turn this out again, you will have a smooth side on the outside of the dress and also on the inside of the dress. I would definitely use a zipper in the same color as the dress, but this was what I had laying around and I really wanted to film this video before I go on my summer vacation, so that's why I used a white zipper, but usually I would go for the same color as the dress. Now we're moving on to hemming the bottom of the dress. I'm using bias binding for this step because it gives a smoother and cleaner finish, especially along curved edges. Open up your bias binding and align the edge with the raw hem of the dress, right side facing each other, and then sew along the first fold of the bias binding. When you reach the end, just overlap the bias binding over the other and fold it over and top stitch this in place. Do a support stitch along the bias binding and as close to the seam as possible. Once it's sewn, fold the bias binding over the raw edge to the inside of the dress, enclosing the seam allowance completely. Remember those rectangles we cut out earlier? Fold them right side facing each other and sew a seam and flip them around. These are going to be the off-shoulder straps for the dress. Iron them flat. Now it's time to sew all the rose petals inside out. Take 2 rose petals pieces and place them right sides facing each other. Sew around the curved edge. Trim away the excess seam allowance to reduce bulk. Then turn the petals right side out and press them flat with an iron for a clean and smooth finish. Take 4 finished petals in each size and sew a loose chain stitch to keep them in place and ruffle them together. Hold the bottom thread and gather the petals together. Connect the petals and sew a stitch around the inner circle. Do the same step for all the different sizes. And when you align them on top of each other, make sure that the petals are asymmetrical. Sew a stitch to keep them all in place. To make the center of the fabric rose, I sewed a scrap piece of fabric right side facing each other and I turned it right side out. Then I started rolling it from one end tightly at first to form the rose bed. As you roll, gradually loosen the roll slightly to let it open like a blooming rose. Use a needle and thread to secure the base as you roll. Just a few stitches through the bottom will keep the shape in place. Once you're happy with the shape, stitch across the base a few more times to hold everything firmly. And then you can go ahead and sew it together to the petals. To attach the petals to the rose center, take 1 stitch through the base of the petal, then 1 stitch through the edge of the rose center and pull the thread so you secure them together. Grab 1 bit of fabric again from the next petal and then a bit from the outer edge of the rose center and pull the thread and draw them together. Continue stitching around the outer edge of the rose center, attaching the petals to the rose center and secure everything in place. Moving over to the straps of the dress, we're going to fold in the ends and flat iron them in place. Next, we're going to hand sew the straps onto the dress, working one layer at a time. Sew a stitch along the edge of the front side of the strap, and as you sew, pull the thread slightly so that the fabric gathers. Once it's gathered, secure it in place with a firm stitch and make sure it's neatly and comfortable sewn in place. Then you can go ahead and do this exact same step on the opposite side of the strap. Sew a stitch and pull the thread so that it gathers slightly, and then sew it together to the dress front. Once you're happy with the placement of the straps in the back, then you can go ahead and do the same process as we did on the front. If I were to make this dress again, I would definitely just skip this step and sew the straps together earlier on when we assembled the dress and sandwich it in between the layers. So I didn't have to do that much hand sewing, but I needed to try to figure out how to attach the off shoulders, and I was unsure how the off shoulder would look if I didn't sew them on by hand, so that's why I did this. Now you can just go ahead and attach all the rose petals. I am using safety pins for this because I want to have the option to remove the roses if I don't like it anymore. They are very big and definitely do not fit every occasion, so I want to have the option to remove them and make it more sustainable in that way. Now for the final result.